Some of the people involved had interest in China, were those who had research and had funding to do research at the lab in China. So clearly that's not an entire topic of discussion that they don't want to engage in or go down that road. And more generally, just defending the public health establishment, which had been commissioning and undertaking research that we now know is it's risky.
Welcome to The Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Bedford, and I'm here with policy editor Joe Lawler. Joe, you were just telling me that we've arrived at the 5-year anniversary of Anthony Fauci standing at the White House podium, trotting out a paper that debunked the idea that COVID came from a lab leak. Tell us about why this paper is significant and what you're reporting about on this anniversary.
Yeah, so this is really about the censorship of the lab leak theory of the origins of COVID. And what we now know is that even at the time that Anthony Fauci and other parts of the public health establishment were trying to debunk this theory and to prevent it from spreading and getting it censored on Facebook, in the public health establishment and elsewhere, at the same time, their advisors, the people they were working with to produce this specific, very prominent paper, knew and were talking amongst themselves that the lab leak was in fact a possibility. So here we are in 2025, and many institutions, many intelligence agencies have come out and said that the lab leak theory is definitely possible or plausible. But that was really known all along. The problem was that many in the public health establishment chose, it seems, to censor discussion of that.
Why do you think they censored discussion of it? You know, it's not like Anthony Fauci went to China and personally released a vial of COVID, right? I mean, what was the interest in pushing this theory that it spread organically at a Chinese market?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question that we've never really had answered in terms of a full investigation by the United States, by China, by the World Health Organization, by the entities that would have the power to get to the bottom of that. And the reason why is that we had years where we weren't even allowed to discuss that possibility because of this impression that was created, that it was completely debunked and no scientist thought it was even plausible. And again, so to get back to the specifics of what happened, right, was that these scientists talked among themselves, including some coordination with Anthony Fauci in the government, to develop a paper which showed that the virus evolved from animals, that it jumped from animals to humans, and that it wasn't really plausible that it could have come out of by accident from a lab. And then that paper was touted by Fauci at the White House to reporters and by NIH Director Francis Collins from his platform to create this atmosphere that the discussion of a lab leak was really a conspiracy theory. And eventually that couldn't hold. Eventually discussion was allowed and did happen on a large scale by very prominent people that the lab leak might have been what happened. But it took years.
But do you think the interest in portraying the lab leak theory as a conspiracy theory, was that to protect funding for future research, future gain-of-function research? Was it because, Donald Trump had floated it and his, side had seized on it, so it had become politicized? Like, in your view, why do you think there was motivation for this effort, for the censorship effort?
Sure. So some of the people involved had interest in China, were those who had research and had funding to do research at the lab in China. So clearly that's not an entire topic of discussion that they don't want to engage in or go down that road. And more generally, just defending the public health establishment, which had been commissioning and undertaking research that we now know is it's risky, right? You're creating labs you're creating viruses or adding to viruses in such a way that can cause pandemics. It's very dangerous. We now know, right? That's obvious now. I think what you're saying is right, that there's an element of just protecting yourself probably at play here.
And finally, switching gears a little bit here,
Sure.
Republicans in Congress, they are preparing this reconciliation bill that is going to address the expiration of the Trump era tax cuts coming later this year, but you were just telling me that there are competing interests among Republicans about how much to add to the deficit and what programs to cut. Give us like a status report on how that's going.
Yeah, it's going to be a major conflict in the weeks ahead as they try to write the actual legislation that would provide the tax cuts and other reforms that Republicans want to see. I think there are two really large competing interests here. So one is that Republicans want to cut taxes and they want to do all these things that Trump has called for: no taxes on tip, no taxes on Social Security, and the rest of it. The other is that they don't want to make the deficit situation worse. It's already quite bad, and they don't want to make it worse in the years ahead. So what we're going to see as they return to Washington in the coming weeks and try to actually write this bill is that they're really forced into a set of tough trade-offs. Like, do we include this tax cut that President Trump asked for? If we do, we have to cut spending elsewhere. Do we go into a program that's really popular like Medicaid? And there are plenty of Republicans that are not eager to have that conversation about potentially reducing spending in Medicaid or other popular programs.
Well, it sounds like they got a lot of work when they come back into town, Joe.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. You can get more reporting from Joe and the rest of the policy team at washingtonexaminer.com.